So we might just get started now. So thank you for bearing with us. So yes, I'm Craig Stanley and I'm one of the national BDMs at CHU, and I'm presenting with David Gow, which some of you may have seen in previous webinars. David is the head of claims within CHU. Now, in respect to housekeeping, if you have any questions, we're changing the setup of this time around. There will be they are private messaging the hosts and some of the panelists. So we've got Cara McInnes online at the moment, and we've got marketing, etc. And I believe and Paul Quitchen will be in soon to answer some of the any questions that you have, and some of those will be made publicly in response. And if we can't, we will come back to you individually with a response later. Now, this also attracts a CPD point from the SCA or ANZIV. Now, you'll get your certificates in approximately 2 weeks or 1 week, and a copy of the recording with all the previous webinar recordings. So they're a great training resource, which we encourage you to share with the people that you work with. There'll also be a survey, which we hope you'll be able to respond to, giving feedback and ideas for future webinars would be great. Now, we'll also be sending out an invite in the coming days for our next webinar in 2 weeks, where Kim Johnson will speak with Cladding Safety Victoria, so certainly look out for that one. Now, in the spirit of reconciliation, CHU acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work throughout Australia, and their continuing connection to land, sea and community. And of course, we pay our respects to the elders past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people on the line today. So just a little bit about CHU before we get into this agenda. So of course, we insure over 1 million properties. So that's approximately about 50% of the Strata Insurance market. So we're obviously very experienced in managing claims. So when you see a fire on the news, generally we have a 50-50 chance when it's a Strata building that it'll actually be ours. We also have a 24/7 claims process and emergency hotline that you will find on our website when your clients need it most. Okay, so that website is a great area of a great resource to you as well for other issues. Now, we also celebrated our 45th anniversary, having written the first Strata Insurance plan 45 years ago. So we're very proud of that achievement. Now, we've got a broad range of products. As you can see, CHU, we've got 2 licenses. So CHU has all those products. The residential, of course, is our major core product, and then we have commercial, etc. We also have Flex Insurance, another AFSL license, so you can obtain 2 quotes from 2 different insurers. You can do that. It's a more flexible product, and you can arrange that through Strata Tech. So you've got your ability to quote. Quotes will be turned around quicker through Strata Tech than if you just send an email. Okay, and you can see Claims View through Strata Tech. All right. We also have 3 companies under the CHU services there. So CHU Assess, CHU Consult, and CHU Inspect. Now, if you'd like to know more, please contact your state BDM that can provide a lot more detail. Now, let's go to the agenda. Now, for these items today, I'll be covering off weather patterns in Australia and why we're addressing weather in the context of insurance, how to prepare your building for all types of weather conditions. So that risk management piece is, of course, very, very important, and what the Strata Insurance covers for weather events. Now, David will look at the claims perspective and what to do if disaster strikes. We'll be talking about catastrophes and catastrophe season and the recent ICA flood review that was done by Deloitte. Now, so I'd like to draw your attention here to the State of the Climate 2022 videos and reports which you can find at that BOM address on the state of the climate. It's a great resource on the state of the climate. Okay. Now, what it does, it goes into, at the site, it goes into further detail, but it shows that Australia's climate has been warming an average of 1.47 degrees since national records began in 1910. So we know that climate change is impacting all of us. So we're seeing global temperatures continue to rise. We're also seeing sea levels are also continuing to rise in line with global trends. And of course, marine heat waves are becoming more frequent and intense. We're seeing more heat waves and fewer colder days. And of course, this is leading to an increase in the number of extreme fire weather days and longer fire seasons across the country. Now, we're actually seeing fewer tropical cyclones since 1982, which you might be surprised about, but a greater proportion of higher intensity storms, which is believed to continue. Now, rainfall is declining in the southern and eastern Australia over those cooler months of April to October. So you may have noticed that. But in the northern parts, the northern parts of Australia, the rainfall has increased during the wet season. Now, this is quite an interesting graph. Now, you might remember last year we showed a video showing what was La Nina, El Nino, and those neutral phases when it came to the weather in Australia. Now, with this graph, it's showing where we are having insurance claims, okay? So neutral is that normal phase which brings normal weather, and you can see we've spent about 48% of our time in this state. But of course, droughts, floods, hailstorms, bushfires, and cyclones still happen and cause losses. Now, in fact, CHU's biggest losses were in Canberra in January 2020, which QBE paid out over $100 million for a hailstorm. And even Cyclone Debbie in 2017 was in this stage. So you can see cyclones still have a big bar in this phase, similar to La Nina. Now, if we look at La Nina, of course, the biggest bar there, okay, it's like that neutral phase goes into overdrive, and it's associated with a higher risk of flooding, lower daytime temperatures, and of course, more cyclones during that phase. And as you know, we've just been through La Nina in the last 3 years. And of course, it was extremely wet with a significant rain event. You know, that $6 billion rain event that happened over southern Queensland and northern New South Wales over that February and March last year. And of course, it was our biggest event ever. Now, El Nino is the direct opposite of La Nina. And we're in that pattern now. And it means a greater risk of droughts for northern and eastern Australia and fewer tropical cyclones. But we see bushfires during this period, of course, due to the reduced rainfall, the higher fire fuel loads, and above average temperatures. So if we think about the grass growth due to the above average rainfall in the past 2 to 3 years, it's contributed to an increased fire risk this season. So it started much earlier. We still have a normal risk of severe thunderstorms and localised flooding when storms bring heavy rain, particularly during the northern wet season. Okay. Now, this is a really interesting slide, I've got to say, and it's from that review of the insurance industry's response to the 2022 floods last year, and the report was done by Deloitte, and it was released in the last couple of weeks. Okay, now it shows the insurance losses from last year's Cat 2221. So you can see that big blue circle, was the biggest in the insurance industry at over $6 billion, and there was 243,000 claims, which is of course unprecedented. Now, it states that we're now in a world where highly costly billion-dollar events we should actually expect each year. So since 1960, we've had 20 extreme weather events that have exceeded over $1 billion in insured damage, indexed to $2022. Now 15 of these have occurred since 1st of January 2010. So you can see those bars, those lines going up since 2000. You know, it's quite significant. You can see that from 2010 that there is a lot more. And, you know, I can name numerous catastrophes that have occurred since that time that don't even get, you know, a circle here, like the Cyclone Debbie and 2019 bushfires. I mean, from Brisbane, so I certainly lived through the Brisbane floods, and then the Cyclone Yazi in northern Australia that happened in 2011. Okay, and of course the 2020 hailstorm in Canberra doesn't get a mention there. Okay, but whilst we've previously shown in previous webinars the list of catastrophes correlating against the rise in temperatures over the last 15 years, the report also notes that Australia is already prone to devastating natural disasters, and that we've reached a mean temperature rise of 1.47 degrees Celsius since the records began, okay, in 2010. So I'd just like to highlight there's a lot of proactive work needed, such as better land planning, improved building codes, and of course preventive resilience and mitigation measures are highly important. But for the purpose of this presentation, we'll focus more on what the insured can do to minimise their losses, because of course if they focus on risk management, you might be able to prevent losses, and it will have the flow-on effect of keeping the premiums lower, of course. So if you've attended some of the presentations previously, I have rolled this slide out before because it's one of my favourite sayings, which is Benjamin Franklin. He famously advised fire-threatened Philadelphians in 1736 that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So what Benjamin Franklin did was he sent an unsigned letter to his own newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, which was published in February 1735. His letter said protection of towns from fire, and it began with the expression an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Then he wrote about how a city should prepare itself for fire. Okay, so that saying, it's very relevant today with our buildings, whether it comes to preventing weather-related, water damage claims, or if it's from bushfires, because as you know, we're in El Nino, so the chances of a bushfire has increased significantly. Okay, so risk management. Now, firstly, I'd like to say, to look after yourselves first, all right? Risk management. So it's a bit like when you're on a plane, you lose pressure in the cabin, put on your oxygen mask before putting it on your children, all right? You have to look after yourself first. So you need a business continuity plan, because what happens if your insurance brokerage or the strata management firm is impacted by that same event? Let's say your people can't get into work and have to prioritize home over work. You've got to think about how you're going to look after your clients, okay? Now, also, you need an employee assistance program in place, okay? Because when an event occurs, the pressure goes up significantly. So, look at what you're doing and you're offering to your people from a mental health and welfare perspective, because as we saw last year from the event last year, it was an extremely stressful time. And of course, your employees are crucial to the success of your business. So please look after yourself first, okay? Now, this is a video that I like to play that goes into how to prepare a bushfire, all right? And we will provide the link in the chat.
Bushfire season varies significantly from state to state, which means that fires can occur all year round. Don't wait for a bushfire to happen. Get ready with these essential tips. Plan ahead and prepare a kit. Fire agencies recommend that you develop a written bushfire survival plan and discuss this with your family. Make sure your emergency kit is complete and you and your family know of its location. Know the bushfire warning levels. Know the bushfire ratings and what they mean. Use them as your trigger to stay or leave the area. Familiarise yourself with your state's fire authority's website so you can keep up to date with the latest alerts. Clear your yard and roof gutters. Make sure your home is prepared. Clear gutters and your yard of combustible materials, mow the lawn, and make sure your house is adequately insured. Consider helping vulnerable people. Consider moving children, the elderly, and people with illness or disability away from danger as early as possible. And don't forget your pets and other animals around your home. Know when and where to evacuate to. Know where you will evacuate to and leave early. Don't wait and see. Come up with a plan to decide when to leave your home, where you will go, and how you will get there. Inform family of your plans. Always notify your family and friends of your plans and intentions. If you're searching for a family member, contact the local police and the Red Cross can help. Know how to turn off gas and power. Know the location of the gas mains tap and the fuse box for your property and turn them off when the bushfire approaches. Cover up with natural fibres. Clothing needs to cover all of your skin and be made of natural fibres like cotton or pure wool. Nylon and polyester can melt and burn. Shoes should be made from leather and have a thick sole. Remember to wear goggles, a face mask to help you breathe, a wide-brimmed hat and leather gloves. Don't wear sandals or runners. Avoid radiant heat. Radiant heat is the biggest killer in fires and distance is your best protection. Taking shelter in a ploughed paddock or a body of water may protect you from radiant heat, but this is a last resort and you should plan to leave early to avoid this situation. Internet and other communications. Your home phone, computer or other devices connected to the NBN will not work if there is a power failure during an emergency. This means you may not be able to call 000 to access emergency services from your home phone. Stay informed with the ABC. During an emergency, your local ABC radio is the best option for the latest emergency information, so keep a battery radio on hand. Check with your emergency authorities for warnings and information specific to your region. Remember, stay connected in an emergency with your local ABC radio, on TV, online and via social media. Find more tips and advice at abc.net.au/emergency.
So yes, there was some great advice there. Yes, so that was some really good advice on that video. So certainly recommend that you take a copy of that and even share it with your clients. All right. Now, we also have flooding and high winds, as you know, we discussed there earlier. Now, a few things to do for properties in areas that are prone to flood, of course, is to keep contents and appliances out of areas that are at risk of flooding. Now, encourage residents and businesses in units at or below ground level to lift valuable items and electrical equipment off the floor. Now, when there's the possibility of major flooding, strata committees should at least know where they can access sandbags in an emergency. And of course, contact the local state emergency services for help, okay, if needed. Now, with the high winds and cyclones, so obviously gale force winds and cyclones can put building structures under a lot of strain, as you can see from those photos. They can also cause secondary damage to dislodging trees and branches and turning loose items into dangerous missiles. So regular maintenance of the property and gardens will help reduce the risk of damage. So here's a couple of practical tips. Cut back the trees and overhanging branches if they pose a risk of falling and damaging the building. And of course, advise the building occupants to secure any items on the balconies or yards. Now, if you're in a cyclone area, have a building practitioner inspect your property prior to cyclone season. Now, of course, know your risks. So a strata committee, of course, needs to have a risk management plan and be proactive. They should know the greatest exposures are. For example, Northern Australia and Lower Australia can have different concerns. Okay, for example, North Queensland, it certainly gets the wind and the rain, but down lower, like Southeast Queensland, Northern New South Wales, doesn't really get the wind anywhere near as bad. But that's not to say that cyclones aren't tracking lower. Okay, we've certainly seen that and seen examples of that. But really, if you look at something like Cyclone Debbie, and it hit around Hamilton Island and Airlie Beach, and it of course smashed it from that wind perspective and had a bit of rain. Now, following this, we had that ex-tropical cyclone and a low which drenched Gold Coast and Lismore. Okay, so when that happens, when there's a cyclone in the north, we're certainly preparing for those two different perils. Wind damage to the north and the rainwater and flooding to the south. Okay. Now, also, based on what we see, we're seeing more hail events in the south, such as southeast Queensland. Hail comes in a narrow line like a runway on a metal roof, and it would dent your metal. But it also blocks your gutters. Therefore, you can see water coming into your building. It impacts air conditioning units and also will damage solar panels. So it's really important to focus on where you're most vulnerable. All right. Now, review your insurance coverage and building valuation. Okay, so make sure that you're encouraging your clients to have a recent valuation. We've discussed this in prior webinars, as you know, and most states have a requirement for a valuation every 5 years. But in 2022, we saw inflation in respect to construction at nearly 20%. But our building sum insureds are really only increasing 4 to 5%. Okay, so there certainly could be an underinsurance problem out there. So we certainly encourage all our strata managers and brokers to be pushing for those more frequent valuations. Okay, certainly will help. Will certainly help them to be adequately insured. Now, ensure your building maintenance is also regular and ongoing. Okay, so insurance has exclusions around defects and maintenance. And of course, a strata policy is not a maintenance policy. We know there's an issue with insurance affordability and availability, but of course, the poorly managed ones will be the ones that are impacted the most. So, as I've said earlier, remember, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. Now, also, the body corporate should have an emergency plan in place. So develop and communicate an emergency plan for your community, and this should include evacuation procedures. So establish clear evacuation routes and assembly points within your complex. Okay, emergency contacts. Share a list of important contacts, including local authorities, with all residents. Communication channels. So implement a system for quickly disseminating storm warnings and updates to all residents. So consider using mobile apps or text alerts for instant communication. Now, the body corps, they should also have an emergency kit and encourage residents to prepare personal emergency kits containing essentials like water, non-perishable food, flashlights, and first aid supplies. And of course, seek help from professionals when it's needed. Now, there should also be a good maintenance schedule for these buildings, all right? So it's important to get into that mentality of being prepared so it minimises the potential for water damage to the property, okay? And of course, water damage is where we see the majority of our claims come from. So, of course, check and clear gutters, drains, downpipes, and balconies. Okay, so they need to be in good condition, free of rust and holes. So large volumes of water needs to travel down the gutters and downpipes. Now, if they're blocked, they can backfill and flood your roof cavity. Now, of course, replace any deteriorating silicon on the windows and the roof, okay, because this is often a cause of claims. Now, a roof inspection, of course, should pick this up. And because, as you know, silicon deteriorates. It's got a limited lifespan. Okay. Now, check roofs, especially the older buildings, for waterproofing capabilities to prevent seepage into ceilings and wall cavities. So ensure tiles and roof sheeting is secure, because these can not only just cause leaks, but they're also dangerous, flying debris in the high winds. Okay. Now, roofs should also be checked before and after an event. Okay, because there has been many times people have not been aware of hail damage to roofs, and they haven't picked it up until months later when someone gets on the roof and sees all the dents. So a storm or cyclone also can cause major damage to a roof, so check yours is in good repairs and fix any loose or damaged tiles. So having someone come out and do a roof inspection could be extremely beneficial, and it's actually not that expensive either. It can save the client a lot of money in the long run. Now, tiled roofs, they can be a problem during a storm, of course, because of large hailstones, hailstones, because they can smash through the tiled roofs, letting the elements in to damage ceilings and walls. Also check the drainage systems, including stormwater and flood inlet grates and basements in underground car parks, to ensure that they can handle those sudden deluges. And upgrade the building envelope. So windows, of course, are an area of vulnerability, and the ceiling can actually deteriorate over time, creating an open invitation to water. So check the seals and replace if necessary. Ensure your window frames and timber fascias are in good condition. So if the paint is peeling, repaint it. Any water that's exposed will just soak into the frame, of course. And lastly, keep loose items like pool and garden furniture secure so that they don't fly off in high winds. All right. Now, just looking at what the Strata Insurance covers, all right? So it covers the building and common property against sudden and accidental damage and not wear and tear over time. Okay, so as stated, the largest number of declines for insurance applies to maintenance-related claims. So Strata Insurance is not a maintenance policy, as we've discussed previously. So it covers things, of course, storm and cyclone damage, fire damage, earthquake, and of course flood if it's added to the policy. Now, this is one of the options under the policy, catastrophe cover, okay? So it can be added to a Strata Insurance policy. And, you know, you can get it for 15 to 30% increase to the building sum insured when there is a total loss, of course. Now, it provides cover for increased costs of the building and repairs due to huge demand for builders. So we know that when we have a big event like that $6 billion event last year, it causes, it inflates the construction costs, for the builders, the tradespeople, the material, etc., when it has been a declared catastrophe. Okay, so the catastrophes can be declared for events such as bushfires, floods, widespread hailstorms and cyclones, but they of course don't happen if your property just burns down, an electrical fire, for example. Then that is not going to be, that's impacting you, but it's not a catastrophe. It has to impact a lot of people to be called that. Now I'll pass on to David Gow to continue and discuss what to do if disaster strikes. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Craig. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on what part of Australia you're dialing in today. It's great to be able to address our broker partners and strata managers. Of course, any topic around catastrophes wouldn't be complete without speaking from the claims perspective. Craig's given a very good summary of preparation and the insurance aspects, and I'll touch on some claims considerations about disasters and catastrophes as well. Something over the last few years we've been very experienced with, as Craig pointed out. First and foremost, what to do if disaster strikes. Of course, ensure everyone is safe and accounted for, and seek emergency support if needed. Nothing's more important than the safety of humans. The property damage and aspects can be considered once we've got all that clear. So once it is safe, do an inspection of all public areas of the property, all the common areas, and then focus on the individual lots themselves. As soon as you can, notify us, your broker, and get that process moving as well. And I'll explain why that's important in just a moment. Throughout the whole life of the claim, I can't stress this enough, keep open lines of communications with strata managers, the insurance broker, and of course, CHU or your other strata insurer and any loss adjusters appointed. All the good examples of successful claims, whether it be a catastrophe or otherwise, have open lines of communications between all those parties. So please do that throughout all aspects of the claim. Initial steps. This is something that CHU provides after every single event. So whether it's a cyclone, whether it's hail, fire, we have a whole library of advice that we release to our strata managers and brokers. This example is from a cyclone, and this is typical of what we do send out. So there'll always be ready communication at hand. In this example, we talk about tarps and storm seals and how they can dramatically decrease resultant damage in properties, and we can only put them on as soon as we know about the claims. You hear this in every catastrophe: take photos of damage and debris, and of course dispose of damaged items as they're there. Don't hang on to damaged items. After an event, whether it's flooding, whether it's bushfires, the local authorities are very, very quick to do rounds of the neighbourhood and pick up items. Take advantage of that and just take photographs or small samples of anything that has been damaged or destroyed. And a warning I like to give at every moment that I'm speaking to a group of people such as this is the phenomenon of disaster chasers. They used to come into areas some months after an event, normally a hailstorm, and try and do roof inspections, offer to manage claims, offer to pay excesses, and offer to take that consideration away from individuals. But they are normally scammers. They normally are there and foremost for themselves. They don't offer guarantees on repairs. So please don't be fooled by disaster chasers. Always go to the broker, always go to your insurer and let us manage the process. And finally, we do offer a tracking service as well. We do go to certain strata managers and be able to identify the CHU risks in an area. I'll show an example of that towards the conclusion of my presentation, so you can see that in better detail there. So the cat season has started. We're into November, and for someone that has worked in claims as long as I have, this is the season that I'm most on alert. This is the season that I scan the news and all the emergency service websites and releases there. As Craig did discuss, we are entering an El Nino period, and we've seen all that plant growth and all the flora that has grown from the La Nina period is now drying out. And with the drier climate comes increased chances of drought, high temperatures, less rainfall, and longer frost season, and as Craig mentioned, fewer tropical cyclones. So what does all that mean? That means that bushfire season has started, and we are likely to see more bushfires in this cat period than cyclones that we would see in La Nina. Last week, we saw bushfires had already started. Properties at a place called Tara near Warwick, 58 houses lost, one tragic loss of life, and we saw about half a dozen properties impact Tenterfield in New South Wales as well. In my view, this is a taste of things to come for the rest of the season and what has me on highest alert. And again, when I have an audience such as this, I know Craig has touched on it, I do like to touch on sums insured, total loss possibilities. Bushfires are probably the most common example we'll see of total losses. Total losses in strata are rare, and I think that does drive a little bit of complacency, but I've seen firsthand what can be done or what the impact is on strata managers, owners, corporations, brokers, when the sum insured is inadequate and we're not able to do the job that we do best when there is an adequate sum insured. The next slide shows a really good example of that. This was from the Black Summer bushfires, this photograph. It's in a town called Malua Bay on the south coast of New South Wales. I was working for QBE at the time, and we had properties in this street, and I drove past this particular complex, and it was quite striking. As you can see, it's quite a unique design with 6 townhouses going up a hill, stepped back. CHU had a property on this very street, only about 100 metres away, where 4 of 7 townhouses were destroyed. And if one more of those townhouses had been destroyed, the sum insured would have been breached, causing significant distress for owners, corporations and lot owners. In this case, all townhouses were destroyed. This wasn't a CHU example, but I had conversations with the broker post that, and there was significant sum insured inadequacies on this one, which again, you can imagine the impact that has on the lot owner, the owner's corporation, the strata manager, and of course the broker. So please heed Craig's advice there and look after sums insureds, get valuations, because this is a real life example of the human impact when it is overlooked. Just going to cast your mind back to 2021. We've seen those graphs that Craig showed earlier on with that increased cat activity since 2010. 2021 was a season like I have never experienced before, and quite frankly, hope I never experience again. There was 5 major catastrophes in 2021. I've started it with hail, which is actually in the later parts of 2020 in Springfield, followed by a bushfire in Perth, followed by floods in Port Macquarie in New South Wales and some parts of Queensland. For good measure, Melbourne had an earthquake. There was storms in Victoria later on in the year. And in fact, I've left out Cyclone Saroja from that, which also hit in 2021. So that was a year that I'd never experienced and what I thought had become the new norm. But 2021 had just finished, and then we were into 2022 and were then met by what the ICA has declared the biggest catastrophe that Australia has seen. Not the biggest one for CHU, interestingly enough. A smaller event like the Canberra hailstorm actually did surpass this event in terms of claim spend, but not in terms of claim numbers. Overnight, we saw a 30% increase of CHU's open claim count. As far as the industry is concerned, that event last year, 243,000 claims at an amazing $6 billion. To put that into perspective, since then, 87,000 claims have been lodged for all weather events at $2 billion combined. So that one event was significant. And of course, we saw Suncorp, the biggest impact for Queensland there at an incredible 60,000 odd claims that they got in. So how you prepare for that is incredibly challenging. I say that because what I thought was the new normal, there hasn't been a significant impacting strata properties since then. So the next major event, I'm really aware, it's not a matter of when, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. People always tell me to stop jinxing it. I tried to stop jinxing it in 2021 and not mention the next one, and I was hit with 5 or 6 cats. So I've gone beyond that. So we've got to be prepared, and I certainly am prepared, and CHU is prepared as well. But a little anecdote I'd like to share with you all is cats have different impacts to strata residents than domestic householders. I'm part of the ICA cat planning committee, and whenever there is a cat either in progress or we are predicting a cyclone or we know a flood is coming, all insurers get together to discuss the strategy. And I'm really proud of what the industry does. I'll touch on that in a moment. But what did become evident to me is the difference between catastrophe impacts on strata residents versus commercial holders and lot owners as well. Thanks, Craig. I go to the ICA recovery centres. I've been to many of them, and there is a distinct lack of representation and a distinct lack of foot traffic from strata residents as we do see from normal householders. And I think that's a part that is played by many of you on this call now. The strata manager is often the quasi-recovery centre for lot owners and tenants and anything relating to the building in a strata complex. Often they're the initial response team with frantic calls from people, the questions that people go to a recovery centre for. What do I do? What next? Where do I go? What happens with insurance? Who do I contact? The strata manager is the first port of call there. And from my experience, by and large, do an absolutely amazing job. If the strata manager does have a contact with a broker and doesn't look after the insurance aspects themselves, the strata manager then contacts the broker. The broker will take over aspects of the initial response, like emergency service response, emergency repairs from builders, emergency contact with loss adjusters, and then contact people like Cara and myself and our team to get the insurance claim process going. And again, I'll repeat it, strata managers, brokers together and CHU, we take that role of a recovery centre. It's not generally known by the industry. It's not generally recognised, but I have done a couple of interviews and one about a year ago with ANZF to really promote this and give a bit of recognition to strata managers and to brokers in this field. But overall, I will say the ICA and the insurance industry does an amazing job post a cat. We're all competitors when we get together, different insurance companies, different underwriting agencies. That is put aside in a catastrophe environment, and we do really look forward to promoting the insurance industry as a whole and doing our bit to get the community restored. It's not always obvious, especially when the media are on the ground, and I've seen them, they're looking for bad news stories. Depending on which part of the election cycle we're in, a politician might take advantage of that. But the ICA and insurers are on the ground immediately after initial event, and we have response teams on the ground, and that was as early as the 3rd of March in the event last year as the roads open, and we all communicate that as to where access is and where we can go in there and make a difference. We are at the recovery centres, as I said, more often than not for commercial and domestic impacted people by catastrophes, and we work together as colleagues rather than competitors. Something not known, we inject incredible amounts of money into a community post a cat, and the example last year was $146 million within 4 weeks. And of course, we put make safes together and try and get people who have less extensive damage back in their home as soon as possible. But we've been in the news recently. The ICA commissioned a flood review, and in my view, that may have been to preempt the parliamentary inquiry, which is just starting now in the federal parliament, and there's going to be some interviews conducted in the next month with the final report due at the end of next year. But some of the observations from Deloitte were the fact that total claims received in the last event was 6 times higher than the average received in all cats since 2016. It was a significant event, and it followed those string of events that I just mentioned in that card deck showing the 5 catastrophes in 2021. So following that, we had Australia's biggest catastrophe, and just to make matters worse, we had pandemic-related labour and supply challenges that already existed. So there were a lot of findings in this ICA review, and you can go onto their website and find that. The paper is about 146 pages long, so it's a really long read. The biggest thing was scenario planning was found inadequate, and systems and processes were exposed by the sheer scale. Some of that is going to be unavoidable, but the report did go through a list of 7 recommendations, and these 7 recommendations don't apply to every insurance company, but they do apply across the board. A lot of it is common sense. For example, insurers should improve their catastrophe planning, particularly their preparedness for extreme catastrophes like 221. We probably didn't need a report to tell us that, but it was a significant finding from the ICA Deloitte report. I won't go through each one individually. I'll just talk through the headlines. Customer experience, that was probably the biggest takeout. AFCA were commenting on the biggest complaints that came through to them was the simple lack of communication. When I state numbers like what Suncorp did, it's very hard to ramp up. You can't have that on the reserve bench waiting for people, and they did a great job when it all came through in the end. But in the initial stages, communication was a big concern. Resourcing, we certainly went through that ourselves. We had to find people quickly, and the operational response that needs a complete review in many companies as well. The final 3 recommendations were more associated with things outside of the insurance companies in ICA. It was governance and transparency, coordination with local governments and state governments, especially with cleanup, and access to funding, a more coordinated review there, and a general review of the General Insurance Code of Practice, which does have the extraordinary catastrophe definition in the code, and it wasn't initiated in that event. And I sat here and thought, if it was never initiated in that event, what type of event would the extraordinary catastrophe definition apply to? And the reason was it really just gave relief to insurance companies, not the consumer. So it was considered not one to try and implement when there was so much consumer and victims of catastrophes as well. So there were a lot of learnings from them. We are going to go through those in detail as an industry. And of course, we're going to learn more from the parliamentary inquiry that will be concluded next year. But finally, from a CHU perspective, so much has changed from the catastrophe event of only 18 months ago. since then. And really, as a catalyst of that big event, we've added Claims View for our broker partners to be able to have access to the very system that our claims handlers have access to. It allows you to answer an inquiry from a strata manager or a lot owner, if that's where the inquiry came from, to go in there, look at what the present position of the claim is, see if a builder's been appointed, see if that emergency payment has been made, see what date that loss adjuster is going to attend site. That will significantly assist the communication challenges that we experienced when there were too many calls for the number of people, and there was a lag in returning that call. It's like a self-service. It allows you to own that interaction with your strata manager or your lot owner. We've recently rolled out a builders management platform called Endata that has been completely rolled out in New South Wales. Endata allows our team to appoint a builder at registration without going into another system, and that allows a very quick appointment of a builder post a claim being registered. From there, linking back into Claims View, at each point of the builder interaction, Endata talks to our Strata Tech system, and it tells you what name builder has been appointed, whether contact has been made, the date of the inspection, the quote that's been sent in, when it's been approved, when the contract has been signed. That is all instantly updated to Strata Tech without the involvement of a human at either end, and it just gives our brokers greater transparency as to where we are at any moment of a claim with respect to a builder. And finally, I touched on it earlier, post an event, we do track the losses we have in a certain area. In this example on the screen there, the red properties are the properties that didn't have flood cover. The green properties are the CHU insured properties that do have flood cover. We can go out on the ground as soon as roads are open, sometimes before residents have even been returned, and get a very clear idea of which of our properties require inspection, require attention, and give immediate information back to strata managers and brokers using this information here. It really has been a game changer for us. So that summarises my part of the presentation. I will say to everyone on this call that CHU has never been in a better position to handle a catastrophe. We have lower claim numbers than we have had for 3 or 4 years, largely off the back of us being able to double our claim staff in the last 12 or 18 months. We've got people trained up in our lodgement team to go into BAU, and then we've got people in our Manila office ready to take over the lodgement duties and instant access to some personnel. And most importantly, we've got a dedicated catastrophe team as well that's permanent, that's experienced in handling catastrophe claims and ready to assist our brokers, our strata managers, and of course, our lot owners. So again, thank you all for joining me this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you have joined us. We sincerely appreciate your support. We look forward to being able to assist you. From a claims perspective, I hope it's not following a catastrophe, but based on past, as I said to you, it's a matter of if, not when. Sorry, when, not if. But again, we're here to be able to help, and it's been a pleasure presenting to you today. Thank you.
Thank you.